Okay, this is another in our series of Ask an Accountant speakers, and we're happy to bring to you tonight Reed Tinsley. He is a nationally known healthcare consultant, and he's one of people that I've known for a long time. The story behind Reed is that when I first started as an accountant that did healthcare, I bought his book, and it was the thing that made me sound smart. And before long, I got to know him. And now we're in the process of re-editing that same book, which is very exciting. So Reed's going to come and give us some of his wisdom tonight. Take it over, Reed.
All right, thank you, Judy, and appreciate the invite. This is a treat. This is a watered down version of a long presentation. Judy's firm, has the complete PowerPoint for any that want that PowerPoint. So let's just talk about medical practice mergers. One of the most enjoyable projects I do every year as a merger facilitator. And so let's just jump right into it. You know, when you merge up, you're merging into a group practice. And so, what are the advantages? Why should I do this? Obviously, increase revenues from the same practice production. And people say, how can that be? How can you increase revenues from the same production? That's because when you merge practices, you're taking the best of the best from every merging practice, the best billers, the best collectors, the best coders, best management, and that will literally will lead to an increase in revenues. I've never seen a merger I've done where revenues have dropped. It's always increased, even from day one. Reduced overhead is a big one. Uh, in order to do reduced overhead, you got to make some tough decisions. But again, you get rid of all the duplicate overhead. When I do this speech, I always say, you've got 5 groups merging together. They all have a CPA. How many do you need? Well, you just need one. And I've been on both ends of that spectrum where I've been elected to be the CPA for the merged group, and I've been one where I got cut out. They decided to start with someone new. Managed care contracting. Hopefully, you have the ability, depending on leverage, to get better managed care rates as a combined group. Technology upgrades. Again, you'll be able to afford a better EMR system, billing system, etc. New revenue streams. Again, you're able to implement different new revenue streams, and some of those streams may come from a merged practice. For example, orthopedics, physical therapy, and another group doesn't have physical therapy. Call coverage, again, that's a big one. You'll be able to expand your call coverage, uh, which is a lifestyle issue for physicians. So that's a good thing. Clinical staff leverage, reduce competition. Again, hopefully, depending on the size of the group and where it's at, you become the big guy in the area. Access to capital, again, whether it be private equity, banks, again, as a bigger group, you have better access to capital. Real estate, you can, either build your own real estate or piggyback on the real estate of other groups. And then lastly, enhance human capital. In other words, like I said, you're taking the best of the best of every group, putting it together, and then that in turn will make a better group. But there are disadvantages of grouping up. One is, and this is a big one that I found over the years, is the loss of control. Uh, you just, as a group, you just can't go out and do your own thing anymore. You're accountable to management of the group practice. And a lot of doctors don't like that. And remember, On a sidebar here, a lot of these things I'm talking about will also apply to non-medical mergers. So please keep that in mind. Personnel decisions. The biggest one there is, everyone has an administrator. How many do you need? One. Who do you put in the billing department? Again, you can't keep everybody. Retirement plan. This is the number one deal buster in every merger I've done. And that is when you merge groups, you're either going to have a retirement plan or you're not. It's an all or none decision. And those that have a retirement plan want to keep it. Those do not, don't want it. And why don't they want it? Because that's more money out of their pocket. Uh, there's a reason why physicians don't have a retirement plan. It's called cost. Startup costs, again, could be very expensive. Lawyer fees, consultant fees, technology. The biggest there, it's kind of tied to that other one I'll get to in a minute, lease and debt obligations, but possibly more overhead. And GPWW is called Group Practice Without Walls. And if you centralize management, centralize accounting, business, etc., again, if you're not willing to cut out other pieces of that overhead, you're putting overhead on top of overhead. And I had a 42 doctor gastroenterology group in Dallas merge, and they went out and hired all this high priced central management, but they did cut out other pieces of the overhead. So you you put overhead on top of overhead. Governance. Who's going to be the managing physician? Not everyone can be. I actually had a group not merged because they couldn't decide who was going to be managing physician. Lease and debt obligations. The big one here is your medical billing technology. Um, if the group decides to go another direction on their EMR and their billing and collection, then what are you going to do with these existing leases that these people have entered into? Disruption of referral patterns. That is a very important one. I had a merger one time, and we had these merger meetings, and one of the doctors came to the meeting and says, I cannot participate in this merger. And we asked why, and she said that her top referring doctor said that if she proceeded to merge with the other doctors, that she would lose all of his referrals, which was about 40% of her business. So just keep that in mind. Again, physician compensation, there are ways around this, but how are we going to compensate each other as a group? Antitrust is a huge one. Uh, you got to be really careful about if you merge up, are you going to dominate the marketplace? And will that create an antitrust issue? Very expensive proposition if you get sued for the government. I had a 75 doctor multi-specialty merger in East Texas, and the day they formed, the competing hospitals sued them for antitrust, and 250,000 legal fees later, the case got settled. So let's talk about some merger myths. Billing will improve. And again, on these merger myths, let me say the backdrop is these myths won't be there if you're willing to make tough decisions at the beginning of the merger. So example, billing will improve. Well, yes, it will if you put all the best parts of every practice together. Okay. Overhead will go down. Yes, it will go down if you make the hard decisions to consolidate vendors, eliminate staff, which is the next item. Staff will be cut. One thing I found in this merger process is that physicians are extremely loyal people and they don't like to cut out long-term staff. But to make the merger successful, unfortunately, you're going to have to make that decision. Reimbursement will increase. Now, this is a merger mess. So just because you merge doesn't mean that the insurance companies are going to pay you more money, and you won't know until you try. Behavior will change, and higher price management is better management. In other words, you go out and you hire that big, expensive, practice administrator, and suddenly it's supposed to be better than what you already have in place. So to succeed, here are three keys to succeed at a merger. Number one, and I tell people these three things in every merger that I'm the facilitator. And one is leave your ego out the door and be ready to compromise. If you think you're going to get your way in every decision about the merged group, you're living in fantasy land. It doesn't work that way. So you got to compromise. And again, leave your ego at the door. And again, as I mentioned earlier, make the hard decisions early. That's really, really tough for physicians to do is make hard decisions early, but you have to do it. So here's how you start the merger process is you form a merger committee, you hire an independent consultant facilitator, you hire independent legal counsel, and you write the check, commitment to the process. Now, people ask me, do I really need to hire an independent consultant facilitator? And my answer is 100% yes. Why? Because the independent consultant facilitator helps you make the hard decisions and 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 more importantly tells you whether or not this thing's a go. I've been in three situations where I've had to go to the practice and say, look, guys, if I merge you together, I will guarantee you I will be divorcing you within a year. You can just tell. And then you hire independent legal counsel because when you draft the legal agreements, uh, everyone that's in the merger will have their own counsel. And so, you want to eliminate that conflict of interest. So here are the three steps to the merger. Due diligence and feasibility. Once you get out of that, you do contract development and then implementation. Timeline at least 6 months. Uh, I'm not really going to get into contract development or implementation because to me, excuse me, due diligence is your most important step of this process. And so let's talk about that for a minute. So due diligence feasibility, the purpose of that is number one, to review and assess the why of the merger. What I do is I talk to the practices and doctors separately. And I always ask them, why are you doing this? What do you see as the benefits? And for example, if all I hear is, well, I just want to beat up on managed care, well, that's not glue to keep a group together. That's a recipe for divorce. Identify issues needing resolution before the merger can take place. The facilitator needs to identify things like the retirement plan issue. Who's going to be the administrator? What's the what's what's the billing company service going to look like, or billing uh, business office going to look like? All of those little things that need to be talked about and resolved before moving to contract development. And again, as I mentioned, decide where the merger should even take place. I had one situation where I had literally two family practitioners who wanted to merge, and we're going through these meetings, and these guys could not decide on anything. So finally, I convened a meeting and I just said, uh, guys, in my opinion, you should not proceed with this merger. And this is why. I go back to the office and believe it or not, true story, I get a phone call from each of the two doctors thanking me for a decision they were too afraid to make themselves because they were friends. They knew they couldn't merge together, but were too worried about offending the other party. And then provide a framework on how the merger should take place. And I'll show you a little slide in a minute on kind of what that might look like. And then communicate the benefits of a merger. Obviously, you want to be able to say, okay, if you guys do this, here are some concrete benefits of this merger. And we'll talk about what Dr. Sholin said one time in a merger meeting at our last slide of the day. So, like I said, on a framework, here's kind of a common one where each practice maintains its own entity. You form a master LLC that does all the billing and collection, pays all the overhead except for physician compensation. Those monies left over, like each practice is a profit pool, let's call it. And then monies are pushed down into practice, and then they pay their doctors and do whatever else they want to do with that money. And also, the beauty of it is they can have their own compensation structure as long as they're in compliance with things like the Stark Law. So when you go through this process, here are a few things to watch out for. And this whole presentation, and the complete one, if you want that, just ask Judy's group for that, is based on literally actual experience over all these years that I've been a merger facilitator. And so what you watch out for is, again, continued resistance. The people cannot compromise at all. Lack of groupthink. Like you're not thinking as a group anymore. You're only thinking about your practice. Sacred cows. Example of that is, someone who is willing to, I don't want to get rid of my administrator. I don't want to get rid of my people. Okay. I want to be the managing physician. Hidden agendas, clashing personalities, and you'll see that early on about clashing personalities. The inability to make decisions and staking out a leadership role too early. Like I said, I did an OB-GYN merger that did not happen because the doctors clashed on who was going to be the managing physician. So this, our last slide here is, and I always end this with this, and that is remember what Dr. Sholin said. And I was merging 9 OB-GYNs together. And we're in a room, and there's one doctor that was kind of leading the charge. And about the 4th meeting in, the doctor leading the charge looked at Dr. Sholin, who was at the end of, excuse me, the conference room table. And he said, Dr. Sholin, we've been through all these meetings and we haven't heard a thing from you. You're just sitting there listening. And I think everyone here at this table wants to know what you're thinking. Do you like what you hear? What do you think about the merger? What are your thoughts, benefits, negatives? And I remember vividly to this day, Dr. Sholin looks up and he says, I only have one question. What's in it for me? And that kind of sums up the whole merger process, which is if there's not a benefit to everybody, you might not want to do it. So again, that's the quick presentation. Again, Judy's firm has the complete PowerPoint, the one I do across the country. So please ask her to do that. So Judy, I'll put it back over to you.
So Reed, that was brilliant. I have sadly gotten to the same positions where I've had groups that I know absolutely shouldn't merge and had to be the one that told them. And yes, if everybody doesn't have something that they're benefiting, it's never going to stay together. You're going to have people that will peel off eventually. if they don't see their benefit. We've also had that happen.
Yeah, one other thing I would add is, the three phases of the merger, due diligence, contract development, and implementation. Uh, on contract development, that's where you get everyone together and sign the contracts. Depending on what those are, I always have a tradition that I've had for years and years and years as we get together in a room, everyone signs the contracts, and then I always bring two bottles of champagne and we pop the corks to toast to the birth of a new group. And then implementation is just like starting a new medical practice. And people ask me, oh, I don't need you part of this process. Well, I say I do just to quarterback to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Um, you know, I had one big merger where they said, "Oh, Reed, we don't need you in the implementation phase," and within 3 months, collections had dropped 50% because they were making very, very bad decisions. They were not ready to start. And that's one thing I do in implementation is start asking people, are you ready? Especially when you get on a new EMR medical billing software. Are you ready to do this? And if I hear no, there's no problem with postponing the start date. So I
Right.
just want to add those two comments.
Well, I 100% agree. We had one that we got involved after that had been merged for a while, and we found out that they made a couple of very serious tax issues because sometimes you have consultants doing this that don't understand things like a partnership can't own an S corp. And so there's little tax issues that show up, and then they go on. And because the IRS really isn't paying attention, they go on for a couple of years until they pay attention, and then things have to get unwound. So to me, the most important thing with the merger is spending the time to work through everything before you get started. Like exactly the retirement, the billing issue. We saw one where the billing company, they didn't want to give it up, but they ended up piggybacking all the new people underneath the one license because they didn't want to buy multiple licenses, um, or they didn't want to buy a new license. So working through all of the problems before you actually take that first step can save you 3 times the cost. If you hire a consultant up front, and you will spend a third of the money that you would spend if you hired the consultant 2 years in when it's a mess.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with that 1,000%.